not doing the intro anymore because we're not part of a episodic thing anymore. This is like, welcome to the rest of your life.
That's how long it's going to feel like as you watch this. It's the blind guy just talks and talks and talks.
Now it's time for Dr. J.
Kids don't think about things costing money.
Well, there was this one incident when my boys were younger. They, we had the quote unquote family computer, but I had a really expensive mouse and they kept banging it, right? And one day they broke it. And so I told them, this was like a $40 mouse. I said, go get me every bit of money you have. And they brought it to me, and it was like $11 between the two of them. But I was like, you're paying for my mouse. And so, to this day, they still think, I'm sure, that was an $11 mouse.
How much did it cost?
It's like 40. But I wiped them out, and that was the lesson. It's like, you break it, you pay for it. They were too young for me to try and institute some kind of payment arrangement.
Charge them interest.
I know, right? So I think they were like 4 and 6 at the time.
I'm sure they were heartbroken when they gave you all the money.
Oh, yeah. They were not happy about it.
You haven't told them today, oh, by the way, kids.
No, I haven't. I just kind of let it go. I'm sure they'll do the math at some point.
Well, they'll probably just think, well, I guess everything was cheaper back then.
Yeah.
Back when cigarettes were a quarter.
Yeah. Gas was 50 cents a gallon.
But I think it's an important thing to point out that, and I mentioned this last week when we were talking about 120 minutes, we listened to a lot more radio back then.
We did.
And the majority of our music came from the radio.
Well, because you couldn't afford to buy all the CDs you wanted.
Yeah.
So you had a couple of choices. You had MTV.
Mm-hmm.
If you were older, you had VH1.
Mm-hmm.
If you were wanting to listen to country, I don't know, did CMT exist then in the 90s?
Yeah.
But
Mid-90s.
most people were still, I think, listening to the radio.
Yeah, for the most part.
I mean, Garth Brooks.
Well, even going back to the 80s, where that culture begins. That idea of listening to the radio, because remember, I don't know if you ever did this, but I had a little boombox with a tape deck.
Oh, yeah.
And you would sit there and listen to the radio and tape songs off the radio.
Absolutely.
And the worst was when the stupid DJs wouldn't shut up at the beginning of the song.
Yep, I would tape whole radio shows.
Yeah.
For an hour, 2 hours at a time, and then listen to the songs I'd gotten, because the money, I mean, it doesn't make sense to younger listeners who can just, because now you don't buy CDs, songs drop.
Yeah.
And you get them on MP3 on something like Apple Music or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then to buy a CD, unless you are part of one of those CD clubs.
Yeah.
Was it Columbia who did
Columbia,
5 cents for a CD?
BMG. I mean, there was a whole host of them.
Yeah, but I never got on that particular train.
Oh, I did.
So for me, I mean, I didn't buy a lot of CDs, and the ones I did buy were mostly classic rock, because I split my allegiance between classic rock and 90s rock.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, grunge, which apparently you have a bone to pick with me.
We're going to talk about that term later.
It's a problematic term, but I think it does tell you something about the music itself.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the unrefined nature of a lot of it, which is what I like about it.
Right.
We can hold off on that.
We're going to get to, I promise, we're going to get to the 90s. I swear to God. Because you have to talk about the 90s. But I didn't want us to leave the 80s behind like they didn't happen, because one of the earliest records I ever bought was Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. I loved that record.
That's a great record.
And then our next door neighbor, I was 7, 8 years old. He was 12. He made a copy of London Calling for me.
That was the first time you heard the album?
Yeah.
That's a great album.
So, but I also had Thriller. And that's the thing. I didn't want us to leave that behind because of all the kids that had a copy of Nevermind, I promise you, they had Thriller too.
Of course they did. Our musical taste was eclectic.
Yeah.
And in the South, our musical taste included, so you would listen, in any given day,
Mm-hmm.
you would listen to Michael Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
George Strait,
Yeah. Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Leonard Skinner,
Mm-hmm.
and Nirvana.
Yeah.
And Stone Temple Pilots, and Alice in Chains,
Mm-hmm.
and George Jones, and Loretta Lynn,
Yeah.
and Eddie Rabbit, and
Ricky
you name
Skaggs.
it, Ricky Skaggs.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot. We got to talk about bluegrass.
We got to talk about bluegrass because of North Carolina. I mean, and being in the heart of NASCAR country, a lot of that country music infiltrated our everyday lives, unlike other areas of the country, which I think makes. But you could say that that hip hop infiltrated New York and L.A. in ways that it didn't infiltrate other parts of the country. I think that's one of the more interesting things about our generation and our eclectic tastes. And one of the things that really aggravated me during that whole alternative music period was this: if you weren't alternative, you were not cool, and you had to be all in. Like, you couldn't admit, even though everybody had it, you could not admit that you liked Thriller.
Well, it's not cool to do that.
Yeah.
I was told, because I loved Guns N' Roses
Yeah.
in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I liked a lot of their older stuff. And I was told that that's not okay by a
Yeah, because it's hair band.
It was the hair band. But I was listening to, well, actually, no, this was late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So we hadn't yet arrived at grunge.
Right.
But it was because it was older Guns N' Roses. I'm like, why does the fact that it's older have anything to do with its cool factor?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't listening to the most current music, which was still hair bands.
Yeah.
But I didn't like where a lot of the music was going.
Well, and the thing is, people, they love to pile on to Cinderella and Poison, but I remember when Cinderella and Poison came out, and everybody loved them.
Oh yeah.
Everybody loved. When Open Up and Say Ah came out, several of my friends had copies of that album, and they thought it was the best thing ever. And then you fast forward literally 5 years, and they're putting as much distance as they can between themselves and that album. And to me, that was so hypocritical.
It's fun music.
It is.
And that should be, but it's almost a certain level of snobbery
It is.
that I don't think grunge meant to create.
Yeah.
But grunge created kind of a grunge snob culture. It's like hipsters.
Say it one
for
more time.
Grunge snob culture.
Gen X helicopter parents. And the problem, and the problem with the fact that these kids are going to college. And she gives all these different reasons why, as a generation, we lean towards this helicopter style of parenting that our parents didn't have. And it was largely because we had the highest divorce rate of any generation before or since.
Are you serious?
Yeah. We have the highest working moms percentage, like per capita, than any generation before or since. So the structure of the home, and of course, we were the latchkey generation. So you add all those factors in, and when we got to be parents, we did the exact opposite because we did not want the same fate to fall on our children. Now, I'm speaking as a generation. This is not every single case, obviously.
Wait, so you're saying that our parents' generation divorced more,
Yes.
and we were living in single homes more,
Yes.
and that's affected us in a way that we don't parent the way our parents did.
Right.
I would agree with that. So, okay, now I actually can talk about stuff. That's
There you
good.
go.
Keep going.
See, I told you, I get it out of you.
There's something else that's changed, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
And I'm proof of it.
Okay.
So keep going. Do your thing, and then we'll
Do the thing.
You were telling me about the article.
Well, yeah, and she was just talking about, one of the interesting things about Gen Xers coming into midlife is we have been, as a generation, we have largely been helicopter parents, and these kids are leaving, and it's affecting us in a completely different way than it did our parents.
Anyway, okay.
I don't remember this movie at all.
Okay, well, it came out in the late 80s. Like I said, it's older Xers, part of that Brat Pack thing, but it's that transition into adulthood. Okay, now I got it. We were talking about how, I have conversations with my sons that I would never have had with my parents. And I think that's generational. I think that when you look at Gen X, we are more open with our kids. It's so weird. We were talking about this. This was not part of any podcast or anything, but we were talking about this just offhand one day about the midlife crisis for Gen X and how they're saying it's going to hit later for us because we still haven't grown up.
No.
As a generation, we're still immature.
I don't know what it's going to take to grow up, to be honest. I just hope it never arrives.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because growing up sucks.
It does.
I mean, I'm happy being a slacker. I don't really want to go beyond that.
But I think that gives us a connection with our kids too
It does.
on a level that our parents didn't have. Because if you look at it's interesting you brought up your dad, and I look at my parents when they were, I'm 43 and you're 44.
Yeah.
When they were our age, I remember my parents being this age and thinking they are much more advanced than we are at this moment, right?
They had to grow up sooner than we did.
They did. They had to grow up a lot faster.
My dad got married at 17.
Yeah.
I mean, he grew up on a farm, and at the age of 12, he was an adult.
Yeah.
Because that was required. I think our generation, we had the luxury of not having to grow up.
Yeah. And I think that factors into that masculinity thing.
I think so. Because a man had to do certain things in order to be successful. Women were naturally, not surprisingly, locked out of the workforce, or at least locked out of the kinds of jobs that they have now.
Mm-hmm.
So men were required to be the breadwinners, otherwise the family wouldn't succeed. So a lot of these gender roles were, they had kind of calcified and hardened and become rigid and set, and that's hard to give up.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start seeing women get into jobs that had been denied them before, it shouldn't be surprising that we see some of these ideas about what a man's job is. Because no longer, and that, again, I say this to be careful, because I suspect if you were to do the research, you would discover that men are still making the lion's share of the money. But I think the discrepancy between what men are making and their spouses are making is probably less than it used to be.
Yeah, it's shrinking.
It's still a travesty that men are making more, and that's got to change.
Yeah.
To do the same job, a man and a woman making different amount of money is unconscionable.
Right.
But we are seeing a shrinking margin between the two, and I think that allows us to do things a little differently.
Well, I know in our household, I do make more than she does, but it's not because she has the same job as me. She's in a completely different field that doesn't take a degree to do.
Yeah.
And so the monetary value is lower for her than it is for me. It doesn't mean she's not working as hard as I am. It doesn't mean that she's any less than me. But because I have an advanced degree, the monetary value that I present in the marketplace is higher than she does.
There's also a lot of cultural capital.
Yeah.
With having a master's degree, or having a PhD, and being in higher education. There's not as much
And-
cultural capital in your wife's job,
Yeah.
for better or for worse,
Yeah.
or in my wife's job for that matter.
Yeah.
Whereas having a doctorate and being a professor
Mm-hmm.
gives you a certain level of credibility that other jobs don't have. I remember when I was in college, I was looking at my sociology textbook, and I guarantee you it's changed since then, but they ranked jobs by prestige
Right.
in the United States. And at the time the textbook was published, number one job in terms of prestige was university professor.
Mm-hmm.
Not doctor, not lawyer, not businessman or woman.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. It was a English professor.
If
or
it's not
university
number
professor.
one now, it's up there.
It's got to be in the top 5.
Yeah.
It's got to be in the top 5, and it's because it carries with it a certain level of cultural capital.
Yeah.
But because we're seeing, I think at least, women doing what had been regarded for so long to be men's work,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see these gender roles challenged, masculinity in its current form, or in the form that our parents knew it. I would not want to be our parents right now, because it's got to be a horrifying world in which they
Yeah.
live, because their ideas of gender and masculinity and femininity were so set. And your dad and my father was the same way. The idea of getting an earring, my father, he told me, is if you ever get an earring, I'll rip it out.
Mm-hmm.
And he was serious,
Yeah.
because he had very rigid ideas. The whole blue is for boys, pink is for girls. This is what boys wear. This is what girls wear. These are the kinds of things that boys are supposed to do. These are the kinds of things that girls are supposed to do.
Yeah.
And for them, it's that simple.
Yeah.
It's cut and dry, and as a result, their view of the world is simpler.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more complicated for us.
It is. I think one of the problems that has happened from, and I think I mentioned Dr. Spock when we were talking about this off camera. Well, maybe I did mention it. I can't remember. My memory's so bad anymore. Don't drink, kids.
Or teach English.
Because even once you drink and you stop and you sober up, I've been sober for 3 years now, and it's like my brain is still like, TMI, I know, but what was I talking about?
Teaching's an adventure.
It is. Oh, okay. So I think for us, and then because of who we are and how we have tried to bring up the younger generations, what we've done, and it's not our generation's fault, and it's not the culture's fault, it's just the way the culture shifted. If you look at the 80s, look at the movies between the 70s and the 80s. In the 70s, you had masculine characters.
Yep.
They were, it's Dirty Harry, Rocky. Well, Rocky's an interesting figure. Maybe we'll come back to Rocky. But you had Dirty Harry, you had Charles Bronson, you had all these different, very masculine, Chuck Norris, very masculine.
Bruce Willis.
Well, that's 80s, right?
Yeah.
But then you get to the 80s and you get these comedies like Animal House, like Revenge of the Nerds, like Porky's, where the jocks lose. And you see the shift. And you were talking about being emasculated on the way over here. They emasculate the jocks in these movies. Even if you look at a movie like Varsity Blues, where James Vanderbeek's character is dealing with, the popularity of being masculine versus the unpopularity of what he wants to do, which is intellectual,
Yep.
right? He's a smart kid, and he's battling that the entire movie. And what wins out? The masculinity.
Which is a shame.
It is.
Because it took my dad a long time. He was very proud of me that I had gotten so far in college. But I think there was a certain cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
That you could be both an intellectual and a man at the same time, and that you don't have to choose.
Yeah.
that you can still be both of these things simultaneously, and that you're not weak because you're an intellectual. Whereas, I mean, for him, and you see it in the movies that he watched. My mother and I were watching TV, and she wanted to watch one of my dad's favorite movies called McClintock, which is a John Wayne film.
Very familiar with
And
it.
I love that film.
Yeah.
But it is a quintessential boomer mentality about
is that
gender.
the one where he grabs her by the hair?
I don't know if he grabs her by the hair, but it's the one where he spanks her.
Yeah.
To put her in her place.
Yeah.
And my father loved this movie, and it hit me the other day how confusing this must have been for him when I went to college, because they make fun of college boys in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they make fun of intellectuals in that film. And instead, what the movie is praising is self-made men who pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
And all the college boys in the film look stupid.
Mm-hmm.
They're ridiculous figures.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, and you talked about this before too, why why the men of our parents' generation are so confused.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of them went to college.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that information? How do you settle that?
Yeah.
And again, when you tell a child, or tell your kid after he's finished how many years of college that, you know, that you're less intelligent than you were when you went in, because again, it doesn't
compute for them.
It doesn't compute for them.
So let me
What did I say? I mean,
it's a pet peeve of mine.
I just showed up, and
It has been a pet peeve of mine ever since I met you. The term grunge.
yes,
Because I love you to death, but you throw that around so willy-nilly, it's like...
for me, it's not just a type of music, though. It's a time period.
Okay. And and I think
It's
that's...
a certain 4-year time period where
Right.
a lot of that music is coming out of the same scene,
Yeah.
even when it's departing from it.
Yeah.
Because there's certain groups that are not grunge. Stone
Yeah.
Temple Pilots is not grunge.
Well, neither is Alice in Chains.
Neither is Alice in Chains.
There is, and it's hilarious because there is a classic clip of Jerry Cantrell, the bassist and the drummer of Alice in Chains, all three walking down the beach doing an interview.
Yep.
And the interviewer asked them as they're walking something along the lines of, so which bands would you consider grunge? And Cantrell's response is none of them. Like, none of us.
He didn't
are
like
grunge.
the term.
None of them like the term because, and he actually expounded on that a little bit by noting that none of them actually sounded the same. And I think one of the things about that term is it got hijacked.
It did.
By the corporate structure.
It did.
And it was rebranded and resold.
For me, it's less a genre than a 4-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And it coincides with the career of Nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that there's only one grunge group.
I would say there's two.
Who would be the other one?
Mudhoney.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Mother Love Bone.
Yeah, but are they grunge or are they polished rock? Because if you listen to that record,
their lyrics are grunge.
Yeah.
The music's polished.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with the term. I don't disagree with you. For me, it's not. You can't characterize anyone as grunge, but you can say that there is a 4 to 5 year time period
Mm-hmm.
where music went through a radical shift.
It did.
And that's the spirit of grunge.
Yeah.
Is this pushing against everything that came before.
Now I'm happy.
Yeah.
Now you can say grunge all you want.
You can't. How could you even make a claim that these groups sound the same?
Yeah. Well, and I have a problem with the term alternative, and that's the one I kind of default to, is the idea of the alternative.
Because the music of that time period they're so rebellious that they refuse to form a school.
Yeah.
Or a movement.
Yeah.
The only thing they have in common is they hate what came before.
The corporate. Yeah.
The corporate, you said it, misogynistic, materialistic hair bands.
Yep.
That's what they have in common. Whereas if you listen to Alice in Chains and Nirvana, the commonality is the lyrics are just weird.
Right.
and STP. The lyrics are weird.
They're very abstract.
They are very abstract. If you could make a claim, that's how they're similar. But the
Right.
musical style,
Mm-hmm.
no
not the
one
same.
sounds like Alice in
No.
Chains.
Nobody sounds like Pearl Jam,
No one sounds like Pearl Jam. No one sounds like STP. No one sounds like Nirvana.
even though Creed tried.
Oh Lord. So no, it's not a musical style. It's a time period.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 4-year period or 5-year period that you could demarcate between when Nirvana first hit and his suicide.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's...
Well, I would say that it actually, and this has been my argument for 20 years, it ends with Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, which is the last really good Corgan album where it matches that feeling that happened. And I think that's where it stops, because by that point, Dave Matthews is on top. Alanis Morissette is on top.
Yep.
You know, and it's the last really great album from the Pumpkins that demonstrates that those ideals that came out of that period. Think about movies that have influenced us as a generation. And what was the first one you shot back was Reality Bites, which I think is that's kind of like the go-to. I as soon as you did that, I was like, damn it. Because it is kind of the go-to. That one and Dazed and Confused, which is the one that I responded with. You know, don't forget Dazed and Confused. Because they are kind of the go-tos when we're talking about that. But I think the reality is, and this is what I was trying to point out with my other responses, we also have to think of things like Big and Goonies.
Yeah.
And
Indiana Jones.
huh?
Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah. Well, especially the first two, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom, and Star Wars.
Yes.
And there's just, you know, when in text messages from the living room, in one of the the very first episode, we talked about, you know, my desire to own a ferret, that it doesn't look like, unless I'm an old, alone miser, I'm never going to own a ferret. But she asked me, where'd you get that from? And do you remember the movie Beastmaster?
Oh, God.
Do you remember that?
I remember it.
Yeah. And that's where I started my fascination with ferrets, when I was a kid and I saw that damn movie. Of course, I didn't want a black tiger, but...
Well, I think you have to distinguish between... I think you have to distinguish between movies that influenced us and movies that diagnose us.
Yeah.
Because movies like Breakfast Club,
Yeah.
Dazed and Confused, Reality Bites, they whether or not I think you could make a claim that Dazed and Confused influenced us.
Yeah.
But I think Reality Bites spoke to us.
Yeah.
Because it was who we were.
Mm-hmm.
It came out my first year in college. And I watched it around my junior year in college.
Yeah.
And I remember being shocked by it and thinking, this is my life. This speaks to who I actually am in some pretty significant ways. But things like Indiana Jones actually probably influence our cinematic taste.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think Reality Bites. So I mean, I chose Reality Bites because it's an obvious Gen X movie.
Yeah.
You're asking for a movie that influences the generation. I think a movie like Reality Bites is hard to talk about because it comes late.
But then you also have Breakfast Club, which is kind of what's interesting. And I hadn't even thought about Breakfast Club, but as soon as you said that, I was like, oh yeah. But what's interesting about the Brat Pack movies as a whole, the older Gen Xers and the younger Gen Xers were impacted by those movies in different ways. The older Gen Xers were living that life. It was telling their story.
Yes.
And the younger Gen Xers, it's a nostalgic piece because God knows how many times it came on TBS or WGN.
Yeah.
You know, while we were growing up. And so, and just watch them over and over and over.
I remember I was in probably my early 20s before I saw a non-edited for TV version of St. Elmo's Fire.
Oh,
You know, and it was just like, wow, this is a completely different movie now.
Footloose.
Footloose. Oh yeah, Footloose, Top Gun.
Yep.
It's funny because Lauren and I were sitting there one night in bed, and we were talking about movies, and I said, have you seen this one? And I ran down like all the staple 1980s movies, and she'd only seen like a couple of them. She had never seen Dirty Dancing.
Oh
And
my
I was like,
God.
and I'm like, how are you a girl and you've never seen Dirty Dancing? That's like the chick flick,
It is.
you know?
It
And
is.
so we watched that. She'd never seen Footloose. We watched that. She'd never seen Top Gun. We watched that. Going into Top Gun, she's like, I always heard this is a boy movie. I'm like, it is a boy movie, but you got to see it because it's awesome.
Did she cry when Goose died?
Yes, she did.
Along with every man in America. That was a hard moment.
That was a hard moment. What was harder was seeing when he comes in and Meg Ryan is just plopped in that chair, just bawling. Oh God, what a great movie. But even that, you're talking about cinematic taste. Okay, so we have to go back. We have to talk about two very important, very early movies if you're going to talk about our cinematic taste. And it is the original Star Wars. For those of you who did not grow up Gen X, you would know it as A New Hope, but we called it Star Wars.
Yep.
And Superman.
Yes. Yes.
Christopher Reeve.
The
We'll
only
talk about
there is.
there. Yeah, those are the two that shaped our cinematic vision, I guess you would say, how we would expect movies to be from then on out. And then you get to the Brat Pack movies, and we start to that indie style, story-driven movie that we would eventually really get into in the 90s, part of, you know, the Reality Bites making, I guess you would say. Those movies helped shape what we expected from our narratives. That would be my argument.
I don't disagree with that.
Because when you look at Indiana Jones, it's just a continuation of those two massive blockbusters. You know?
I would agree with that.
Because you've got the cartoon character style man in Indiana Jones, but you've got the scope of Star Wars.
Yep.
You know? Because just huge, vast, open spaces.
It's an epic movie.
It is. So I think those two, more than any other movies, help shape what we would expect cinematically. And then, like I said, as far as narrative goes, the Brat Pack movies kind of help develop or taught us how to develop narrative and what to look for in narrative. And that's why by the mid-90s, you get those movies. Did you ever see a movie called Suburbia?
No.
It's really good. It's one of the first things that Giovanni Ribisi ever starred in. It's really good. It's a little independent flick. It came out about a year after Days Confused. And it's basically this one night at this these teenagers like hang out at this gas station. And it's the course of one night while they're at the gas station. And just all the different things that happen that night. Like they try to buy beer, they try to score some weed, all kinds of stuff. And it's a very interesting movie, but it's called Suburbia.
I'll check it out.
Yeah, it was one of the first things I ever saw Giovanni Ribisi in. This was even before he went on Friends.
I think Star Wars and Indiana Jones created expectations too, though.
Yeah.
That were consistently let down.
Yeah.
Because after those, and Superman too, after those, what are you going to do next?
Right.
Star Trek is about the only one that really competes.
Well, specifically, Wrath of Khan.
Oh my God.
Because the first Star Trek sucks.
Yeah. Well, the uniforms alone are ridiculous.
Yeah. But Wrath of
Hey.
Khan, they hit their stride with Wrath of Khan, and that one, and what was the fourth one, where the Search for Home or something like that, where they come back for the whale?
Voyage Home.
Yeah, Voyage Home.
I like Search for Spock
Yeah, part 3.
a lot. Yeah.
Now, which one? Part 5, the fifth one was the one where they supposedly meet God, right? Yeah. And Kirk's got that wonderful line where he's, "Excuse me."
What does God
need with a starship?
You think maybe these movies influenced our sense of humor?
Absolutely. You brought up Ghostbusters.
Oh.
I mean, and I don't want to say it, okay, so generationally, I really don't know if you could take a litmus test to see how much that movie has permeated the way we talk to each other.
Oh, Ghostbusters?
Yeah, but I think it's massive. I personally believe it is.
Even take one small line from a movie like Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to hear someone say, "I have a bad feeling about this," even if they're, okay, let's assume you're just hanging out with someone and they say that, your first thought is Star Wars.
Yeah.
If you were to say that to your wife, who's a millennial, she may not immediately leap to that.
Well, she won't at all because she doesn't like Star Wars.
But Generation X,
oh yeah,
one of us knows what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Ghostbusters, I don't know that I could place. I don't know how I would say it's influenced our humor, except that I know it has.
Yeah.
Or at least created our, again, and it's like Star Wars, it's like Indiana Jones. It's created a high standard.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, and that's actually the worst part of it all,
mm-hmm.
is that because it creates a high standard, we spend a lot of our time as a generation completely and utterly disappointed. Because it just doesn't match up.
Yeah.
Like when the new Star Wars films, not the ones now, but the episodes 1, 2, and 3 came out, younger kids loved them, and Generation X was irritated.
Yes, we were. What have you done?
They don't live up to what we grew up with. What is it? What's the fourth Indiana Jones film, The Crystal Skull?
Yeah.
Doesn't live up to our expectations because those films, and I would include Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I love, those films were so good.
Yeah.
So in some ways we were spoiled as youngins. By these really great films, and now we see other directors try to model their movies after them. The new Star Trek movies aren't nearly as good.
No. Well, so the first one in the new series I really enjoyed.
The first was great. The second one, when they tried to do the Wrath of Khan thing, I respected it. I saw what we were doing. I mean, they had.
You respected the effort.
I respected the effort, and they had Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
Who's wonderful, and he makes perfect sense to be Khan.
Yeah.
He makes perfect sense, but the movie just doesn't really. It doesn't take you there.
Mm-mm.
One of my friends referred to it as the subtitle of Star Trek, Into Bromance. I think had we not had the Wrath of Khan, we would have liked those movies a lot more.
Yeah.
If I keep looking down, it's because my dog is trying to get my attention.
I know. I noticed. She keeps circling. And we forgot about one other crucial one, Back to the Future.
Oh. That influences our sense of humor too.
It does. It does.
That one has an impact on our sense of humor.
it has an impact on our sense of humor and our impact on understanding narrative. Because that narrative is actually kind of complex when you think about it.
It's wonderful.
It is. It seems like there's a basic premise, you know, go back, fix your mom and dad, everything will be better. But there's so many different possible cliffs that you could fall off of during this that you don't really think about until you watch that movie, you know?
Well, and also think about his life and compare your life at the time to his.
Yeah.
Not necessarily yours in particular.
Right.
But think about the family life he has, which isn't great.
No.
He's dissatisfied with his parents. His parents are not happy together. Does it start to sound familiar?
Yeah.
He spends a lot of his time by himself.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying, maybe
Yeah.
there's a reason why that movie, aside from the fact it's hilarious and it's a great car, just maybe one of the reasons it speaks to us is because it was us.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to the statement you just uttered. It's a great car. It's a horrible car.
That's what makes it so great, dude. That's why it's so wonderful. Because it's falling apart. This time machine is falling apart. I love it.
What is it Doc Brown says? He says, a DeLorean? He says, well, if you're going to do it in style.
It's so good.
I remember when my kids were younger, at the first time they watched Back to the Future, my sons, they were both just all about that DeLorean. And eventually I had to stop them at one point and say, that car actually sucked. It was a horrible car.
Yeah. But the doors, dude. The doors.
I know, but they could have gotten the same effect if he'd gotten a Lamborghini Countach, you know.
But but the point of the DeLorean is it's not a pretty car.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing that I like about it. It is it's unashamedly ugly.
Okay, so back to the TV. All right, so here's my history with Transformers. Do you remember Ultraman?
Yes.
Okay, it used to come on WGN on Saturday mornings at 6:30. So what would happen is at 6 o'clock in the morning, I would get up. We kids would get up early in the morning on Saturdays because all morning long was Saturday cartoons, and it all ended with Looney Tunes.
Yep.
But at 6 o'clock, ABC would show Scooby. So I'd get up to watch Scooby. And then at 6:30, WGN had Ultraman. And then before Transformers, at 7 o'clock, I would switch over and watch, I think it was the Flintstones on ABC. Because they had the Hanna-Barbera lineup early on Saturday mornings. And they would show Josie and the Pussycats sometimes. They would show Space Ghost. Not Space Ghost Coast to Coast,
no,
just Space Ghost. But they would show those things. And Birdman, the Birdman. I can't remember what is it. Anyway.
Is this all on WGN?
No, that was on ABC.
Okay.
But Ultraman was on WGN, so I'd switch over to watch Ultraman. And one Saturday morning, at the end of Ultraman, this new cartoon started. And it was about these robots. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's how I was introduced to Transformers. And I was a huge Transformer fan because G.I. Joe was after Transformers. That came later.
Does Optimus Prime die?
Oh, yeah. He dies in the movie, in the cartoon movie. And then they brought him back like 2 seasons later after the movie because they needed to sell new toys.
How did they bring him back?
So,
like resurrection?
Yeah. So Starscream.
Oh my God.
Starscream's ghost shows up. And he's able to get Unicron's head to give him a new body. And of course, he double crosses Unicron and Unicron blasts him off into space. But the Autobots figure, well, okay, maybe we can do the same thing for Optimus Prime.
Whose ghost is hanging around?
No, he's like dead. So they go out to like the tomb, and they try to get him to come back to life, and it doesn't work. But like these shady Decepticon characters come around, and they bring him back to life and program him as a Decepticon. So for like an episode or two, he's trying to kill the Autobots. But then like Ultra Magnus and Runimus Prime change him back to good old Optimus. And
does he inhabit the same body?
yeah.
That sounds cheesy.
Yeah. It was 1980s cartoons. And of course we ate it up.
The scripts were terrible.
Yeah,
I tried watching. I don't remember what it was. It might have been. They might have actually shown in the past 5-10 years something from Transformers, and I'm watching this or trying to watch this, and I had to turn it off because the script was so bad.
Oh, go back and watch like the first season of Transformers. There are so many places where the Transformer that you're watching will just change color and then change back.
What?
Because the animation is so bad.
How did this show become popular?
And they didn't, because when you're like 7-8 years old,
you have no standards.
You have no standards, and robots. I mean, come on, it's robot. Remember in Big, it says, you know, where they present him with a building that transforms into a robot. They're like, this is what kids want, you know. And of course, it was on the backside of that popularity. God. That's why when Transformers, like the next popular Transformers series was Beast Wars. They've done the inanimate object thing. Let's do animals.
What about GoBots?
Yeah, I remember that was so cheap and cheesy.
Well,
the toys were even cheesy.
They were trying to cash in, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
Because this comes after Transformers.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like Mask trying to cash in on G.I. Joe. Remember Mask? They had the vehicles and they put the helmets on.
Oh, I had the playset, man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, with the volcano. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was the greatest present ever.
I had the Camaro.
Of course you did.
The Camaro with suicide doors. You know, you want to talk about that stupid DeLorean.
The doors are great. The doors are great. It's my favorite part about the DeLorean.
Right.
It's a horrible car, but the doors are great.
All right, I'm going to throw one out there to see if you remember this. Voltron.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Which one was your favorite, the vehicles or the lions?
The vehicles.
Yeah.
Because it's Transformers.
Yeah.
Why would anyone prefer? No, it's the vehicles.
Well, the lions had a better storyline.
Who cares? We're kids. We don't care about story.
Well, I did. I cared about narrative.
I didn't. I'm like, look, it's a vehicle.
I was 8 years old, and I was sitting there thinking, the narrative of this story does a lot more with our current cultural standing.
It plays on certain social constructs.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why Thundercats was more popular than He-Man. Because remember, it shouldn't have been, because it was. But the thing is, Thundercats had a better story.
Yeah. But He-Man, I preferred He-Man. I watched Thundercats like 3 times, and I liked it because it was the forbidden fruit. I wasn't allowed to watch it, but I would sneak it from time to time.
Right. That's what I had to do with MTV at one point.
Well, so you had cable, I think, before I did. When did you get cable?
Oh, God, like 80, 81.
So I say I remember some of these shows, but I could never have watched them because so anything on WGN I would have heard about. I would have heard about from other people. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have it until I was in high school. Mm-hmm. There was no cable until high school.
Right.
I'm assuming we're going to get to MTV eventually in this conversation because that I think is probably
that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You know,
because it influences you, and this could create certain problems with our conversation because we're going to have to talk about it again next week. Because next week's music, right?
Yeah.
You got to talk about MTV again.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about it twice.
You could talk about it forever.
Yeah, you can.
And you can talk about how it influences our views about things like politics, gender,
it influences
class,
everything,
race, everything. I don't know. I'm going to hold off on that.
All right. Yeah, we'll save MTV for the end.
So is it just television shows? Are we talking about sports? Are we talking about?
Yeah, we can talk about sports too. I mean, because one of the things, okay, so I'm a Dolphins fan. And the reason why I'm a Dolphins fan is because growing up here in the Triad, we were in their market because we didn't have the Tennessee Titans. Pittsburgh was too far out. Indianapolis was too far out, but apparently Miami wasn't, even though it's no closer than Pittsburgh or Indianapolis.
See, I got some Pittsburgh games, which is where I think I became a Steelers fan because I liked Coach Cowher a lot.
Yeah.
Because he was always
that's
yelling and
later.
so intense
Yeah.
and so angry.
That's late 90s.
Well, I didn't care about. Well, he's early. I mean, I remember watching him when I was in high school.
Okay.
I didn't come to professional football until I liked watching the 49ers because I liked Joe Montana
Right.
and Jerry Rice.
Yeah.
Just like everybody else in America. You either really loved them or you really hated them. And you loved them and hated them for the same reason because they were probably the best duo in the NFL. And
I
still be the best duo in the NFL.
I hated them.
No, because they were the best duo in the NFL.
No, because they beat the Dolphins in 84.
That's a pretty long list, though, of people who've beaten the Dolphins.
At one time, we were really good.
Yes, you were.
There was a reason why I became a fan. It wasn't just because, well, the thing is we were in their market. So if you were watching NBC, then on Sunday afternoons, you're watching the Dolphins. And in 83 was when they put Marino in. And you start hearing on the news. First, I heard on the news about this Marino guy for the Dolphins. And so then, as a kid, I'm Sunday afternoons, I'm by myself in my room. My mother made the mistake of giving me a TV when I was a kid. And so, I didn't have cable in my room. I had rabbit ears. I had to go to the living room to get cable. But I had my 2600 in there.
But all the football games, and this is probably new for younger people, all the football games were on major networks.
Yeah, broadcast TV.
There was nothing on cable.
No, if you put on... This is the thing about early ESPN. If you were watching ESPN, you were watching bowling, skee ball, skiing, the Olympic sports.
Or Sports Center.
Which back then wasn't the Sports Center that we have now.
Oh, no. It was not at all fancy. It was, this is what happened. Here are the scores.
Yeah, they didn't have the money for the clips.
No. Or the rights.
Or the right, yeah. They couldn't get the clips for the things, so they had to tell you. Which in a way is awesome because they had Chris Berman was like Chris Berman's the earliest one I can remember. And nobody can paint a picture like Chris Berman. He is excellent.
He still does it.
He still does. He's wonderful at it. All right. Peace. We'll see y'all next week.